Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the roundtable of the Environment and Social Issues Cluster. This is under Nickel and Dime, which is the research platform for the Center for Economic Studies. Today, we'll be talking about the mineral intensive, sustainable form of mineral intensive growth in India. It's a very topical issue right now, specifically in the context of India with regards to the environment and social impact um, of this particular topic. With that being said, our panel members today are the members of the cluster. Jishant will be leading the discussion. We have Varshita, Sanjana, Malvika, and Ria. Dishant, I'll hand it over to you. Take it forward.
Uh, so thank you, Ashika. And so as you mentioned, our topic that is towards sustainable mineral extensive growth in India, and as well as managing the environmental and social impacts, basically the environmental social governance practices, progress and challenges. To begin with our intro, so we know that India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world and is heavily dependent on the mining sector to fuel this growth, and it is expected to have a significant increase in the demand for mineral and metals in the coming years. So the mining industry has the potential to contribute to the country's economic growth, but at the same time, it also need to uh, possess the environmental and social risk. Hence, it becomes very essential to promote the sustainable mineral extensive growth while managing the negative effects of mining. So when it comes to the Indian mining industry, they have taken steps towards adopting ESG practices in recent years. And even the Ministry of Mines, they have developed a framework for sustainable development, which includes measures such as mandatory environmental and social impact assessments, mine closure plans, and the use of clean technologies. Indian mining companies have also adopted ESG policies and established a sustainability report mechanism to track their progress. So to begin with, we have some questions which will address these challenges, the role of regulatory bodies and the initiatives, the technological advancement, and even the economic growth that India needs to balance. So to begin with, our first question, that is, what are some of the key challenges that investors face when investing in the Indian ESG funds, and how can these be overcome? Yep. Anyone?
Yeah, Malvika, go ahead.
Okay, so starting with the challenges, I think that basically ESG is quite a new field today. Traditionally, when we look at economics and finance and investing, we haven't really taken into account eco and sociological factors in the past. And now, with the growing ecological crises and the growing awareness of socioeconomic events, um, there's a small pool of ESG investing and ESG funds that are slowly growing, but there's very little data on them, which makes it very difficult for investors to evaluate the security of their investments. There aren't many trends to follow, and there are very limited transactions. However, I feel like there is a small pool of ESG funds that are slowly growing, and slowly there is a push towards sort of so-called green funds and green finance. And secondly, if we talk specifically of the Indian context, there is currently no standardized accounting metric for to call it socio-ecological standards in terms of accounting. Like internationally, we have standards like the SASB, GRI, and other standards. The Indian ones is yet to be sort of consolidated and modeled, and right now it's a sort of heterogeneous pool of a mix of different standards. So I feel like regulatory bodies need to come in here to form sort of regulated and consolidated set of standards that Indian companies can use for their accounting. To overcome these challenges, I feel like one, there needs to be clear, transparent auditing and accounting of these funds, and especially according to this ecological criteria. We need to look beyond the traditional metrics of evaluation. Economic and social metrics have to be reconciled, and there needs to be focus on ESG fund managements. Maybe we need to outsource this to third parties who specialize in these areas.
Yeah, Malvik, I totally agree. the key challenges that is definitely would be the quality of ESG data and the analysis on Indian companies, as you said. And then secondly, the standards that we have set for the Indian companies. We have to set a benchmark and look at the standards that are used in other countries, and we have to overcome these challenges. And then the lack of even consistency in ESG reporting and standards across Indian companies. Eventually, it will help investors to push for greater transparency and standardization in ESG disclosures. Yeah. So I totally agree with you, and all the points were like right on. Yeah. So moving to a second question, that is the impact of ESG investing on the broader Indian economy and financial market in the years to come, and how investors can position themselves to take advantage of this trend. Yep. Anyone?
So I think that we can't conceptualize our economic future as a nation and even as a planet right now without considering ESG criteria. It's not an option, but with the growing ecological crisis that we're facing, it's a need to reconcile it, and we have to integrate it into every aspect of the financial economy. I feel that capital grows. To put it poetically, I think that capital will flow where it is greener, where the grass is greener. And we can see a push for investments in capital, and even in the stock market, we can see trends moving towards companies that have bigger green portfolios and that have been very in touch with their sustainable goals, especially after more and more international conventions are happening, and as nations together we're outlining our goals. We're also going to attract a lot of international investment, and there will be a lot of similar stakeholders globally, which will need to take into account with this increasingly globalized world. Investors must position themselves on the right side of this wave that's taking us across here. They're going to have to strongly they're going to have to evaluate critically and identify companies with strong ESG credentials and potential to see where to channel their investments. Of course, we're going to need a lot of sophisticated due diligence, some of it which can be done with artificial intelligence and some which will still need to be done manually. Along with ESG, there are a lot of ESG-focused mutual funds that are coming up, I believe. They're called exchange-traded funds, ETFs. I think that's also a huge new growing arena. So I think that this is going to be an important area for us to focus on.
Yeah, definitely. The thing is, ESG investing, like it would have a very significant impact on the Indian economy and the financial markets in the coming years. More investors will prioritize in ESG factors. Companies that demonstrate strong ESG performance may be better positions to attract capital and generate long-term value for shareholders. And this could even drive improvements in corporate governance, environmental, and even sustainability. So therefore, investors can position themselves to take advantage of this trend by incorporating ESG factors into the investment process and seeking out companies that demonstrate strong ESG performance. They can work with asset managers who specialize in ESG investing or considered in even investing in ESG focused fund, as mentioned by Malvika, the mutual funds related to ESGs, and then can exposure and a more offer to exposure to diversified portfolios of companies with strong ESG profiles will come up in future, and it will benefit us in like an overall manner. Yeah, that's it.
I'd also like to add a point in terms of the awareness created around like the important say I feel like the Indian government has a role to play in the state itself has a role to play in how aware the people are and how interested they should be. So when the financial markets see how invested the state is, especially with regards to say Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and all, I feel like when the state shows interest in such environmentally leading policies, the market will also duly follow. And I think that's also important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. So we'll be taking a different direction to our questions, and I would like to include the mineral intensive growth in India perspectives in these questions. And so coming to our next question, that is, what are the most significant environmental and social impacts associated with mineral intensive growth in India, and how can they be mitigated? Yeah.
Should I take this one up?
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can.
I think you can go ahead and.
So, dividing the ecological and social factors into two different aspects. The ecological impacts are pretty obvious. Obviously, the excavations that are happening at this rate are not sustainable, and even though there are some sort of flimsy sort of regulations set around that, even after mining activities and excavations take place, there is no time given for the soils and the land to naturally recover, or any sort of procedural mechanisms put into place for the land to sort of recuperate. Issues of land degradation, soil erosion, loss of biodiversity, and pollution are all coming up and they're associated with it. And the social impacts are quite disheartening. There's a lot of child labor associated with the mining industry, and especially in some speaking in the Indian context, there are a lot of rural areas, and especially in tribal areas in belts in Jharkhand, in the northeast, and other places where the practices of rat hole mining and other really exploitative practices of mining still occur. And it leads to a very detrimental effect on people's health, with many of these people turning blind and having their lungs and liver completely failing by the time they're 30. Even after the child labor rules have been put in place. Then moving on to the tribals or the Adivasi side of it, tribals and Adivasis have been displaced from all of their homes. There's been a loss of livelihood, cultural heritage, even social cohesion to a certain extent. And it brings us to questions of whether we as a country, the nation that we pictured, say, pre-independence, have we really followed up with the goals that we'd set as a nation for our post-colonial, post-independence era, or have we fallen into the same patterns with the extensive development projects that were taken up after independence? I think there's a need to look at the social impacts of that and see whether we've been aligned with our goals. Lastly, for mitigation, I think that while there is a need for mining, obviously we can't give up mineral extraction, especially with the switch from fossil fuels to electricity, the calling impact for electricity. That means lithium, that means a lot more lithium. And recently there have been a lot of lithium reserves found in Jammu and Kashmir too. I'm sure there'll be a lot of projects taken up there. For mitigation, I think that there needs to be sustainable mining practices and stricter regulation. While there are a few regulations put in, I think in 2019, 2017, and in the 80s, they need to be strictly enforced. There needs to be community engagement with the stakeholders of these areas and the people that reside in these areas. And technological developments, legal framework, strong legal framework. This is where law students like us come in. And lastly, environmental impact assessments, or EIAs, could play a role in sustainable mining.
Right. So, to add to what Malvika just said, to sort of like give you a perspective into the cobalt and lithium mining all over the world. So, KCC is like the largest cobalt producing mine in the world. Most of you must have heard of it. It's the one that Tesla recently inked a deal with. It was owned previously by Glencore, and it has recently been embroiled in a lot of controversies regarding child labor, and also because there are a lot of controversies surrounding the treatment of their employees. So on an average, a KCC security guard employed by a subcontractor earns just around $135 a month, and they have to work for like 50 hours a week, which is way above the daily wage guidelines that are prevalent in Congo. And for an average household of two adults and four children, the living wage in the region is around $402 per month. So you can get a perspective of how underpaid these workers are in such cobalt mines. And so the reason why this is important from a geopolitical perspective is because mines like KCC are at the center of a geopolitical arms race in which powerful countries and companies are basically scrambling to acquire these resources needed to dominate the transition to EVs and clean energy. While making investors very rich in the process, these Congolese workers are toiling long hours to wrench this critical mineral from the earth, but they aren't getting much in return. There have also been 5 cases of deaths in these mines since the last year. Moreover, to give an Indian perspective on how the mineral intensive growth industry has affected people socially, the Sundargarh district in Odisha, which is like the second highest concentration for mineral extraction, is home to numerous Adivasis and indigenous communities, primarily 3 communities that are Orans, Mundas, Kharias, and Kisans. This area is covered under the 5th schedule of the Indian Constitution, which provides them a unique governance mechanism, especially designed for these tribal communities. However, the policymakers, they have never taken cognizance of these constitutional provisions, and they've never tried to understand the needs of these Adivasis and how they want to live their lives. They've violated their sacred groves and their culture and their value system, and it's been given this label of urbanization, and sort of they've disguised it in people into believing that it's for the urbanization, but whereas the real stakeholders are suffering in the process. So yeah, would anybody else like to?
I just wanted to add that, like you mentioned, even something so harmless as makeup as a very exploitative origin behind it, with the most beauty products having glitter, anything containing glitter or sparkle in it containing mica. Mica has also, there have been a lot of studies and research to show that the mining processes that go behind it and some certain belts in India and other places are extremely exploitative, and there's a lot of child labor and again a lot of rat hole mining and other practices associated with it.
Yeah, and also,
Right.
sorry, Ria, go ahead.
Yeah, also I just wanted to add that there's also been a lot of divide in how these districts have been divided. So like the district headquarters and where the non-tribal communities live, they haven't been affected by the mining because they haven't been relocated. It's only the tribals that have been affected, tribal inhabited areas that have been affected by these minings. So you can see how they're like kind of discriminatory to certain communities, and they prefer certain communities over others.
Yeah, my point was actually like very closely linked to Ria's point. It was with regards to displacement that happened, within these communities which for them the primary breadwinners engaged in say mining in these particular mines, and it's also this displacement, and they also have unions among themselves, right? It's not like they have these like few representative bodies that try to negotiate with the either private or government stakeholders, to negotiate rights and all. And we've seen in the past how that led to massive protests, and most of the time it doesn't work. Another important point I wanted to bring about was that it's not just say, when it comes to talking about these sort of, mines and such, since, there is like a involvement of both private and government, I think we need to keep in mind it's not always just the private industry that is to blame. It's also at some level the state. So just to bring that.
Also, just to add that a lot of the mining corporations that are working in these tribal inhabited areas, they haven't even gotten the environment clearance, and a lot of them are appeal cases pending in various benches of the NGT. But there's no like injunction order to like tell them to stop their operations. They're still continuing expansion of mines. So there's this whole legal they have to face a lot of like legal problems, and it's a very long and convoluted legal path that they have to tread. that most tribal communities may not be aware of their legal rights, and most of them may not have access to a reliable legal counsel. So that again makes them very vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree. There's this sort of information asymmetry that exists with this whole thing, which ends up being actually a larger problem, even beyond the issue.
So I think we pretty much covered all the aspects and all the possible real life example in this question. These impacts need to be mitigated through a better planning and management, including proper waste disposal, reforestation, management of mining operations, including proper waste disposal, rehabilitation of degraded land, and additionally adding to your points, that is engaging with local communities and providing them compensation, livelihood alternatives, and then basic services that can help reduce a negative impact on the social impacts. Yeah. So moving to our next question, that is, what policies and regulations exist in India currently to promote this sustainable mining practices and address environmental and social concerns, and how effective are they?
Yeah, go ahead, Ashita.
Yeah, Vishita, you can go ahead.
So basically, as you know, India being a large country, mining has been a very important activity in India since past so many years. Just to go with the figures, it has about 3,500 mining leases for 40 major minerals, which approximately covers around 3 lakh hectares in the total India. So India being a major producer of these crucial materials has to have a balance between the environment as well as while producing these materials. And the fact that countries' natural resources are located in the forest covered areas, it has to have a major focus on the environmental concerns as well. So as Jashant first mentioned, India is one of the major growing economies in the world, and it has to meet a certain criteria and demand to increase the GDP, as well as that GDP being linked to the minerals. It has to keep a balance there. So India came into the Paris Agreement, which requires low carbon economy, and it has several acts like Coal Mines Conservation and Safety Act, which improve the efficiency of producing coal while reducing the damage to the environment. Few other acts which were implemented in India were the Water Prevention and Control Pollution Act in 1974, the Water Cess Act in 1977, the Air Act in 1981, and the Environmental Protection Act, which basically monitored the mining activities for the protection of the environment. And during all these phases, the mining activities were controlled and the environment had to be looked upon each and every time, due to which the destruction was reduced a lot. One of the major other policies, which was the National Environmental Policy 2006, also aimed for conserving the environmental resources by increasing the resource efficiency and also promoting the equity and safeguarding the principles of the good environmental governance and protection. So these are some of the basic acts and policies which were implemented. Though they have been implemented, there should be a stronger hold by the government to look into it and see whether they have been implemented well enough in the country. And there should be a higher level of penalties if they are not implemented properly.
Right, Sanjana?
Yeah, India has several policies and regulations in place to promote sustainable mining practices and address environmental and social concerns. The National Mineral Policy (NMP) is one such policy that has been revised recently in 2019 to address issues related to sustainable mining, mineral exploration and development. And this policy emphasizes the need for scientific mining practices, environmental conservation, and the involvement of local communities in decision making. Additionally, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has issued guidelines for sustainable mining mining practices, which include provisions for environmental impact assessment, conservation of biodiversity, and mitigation of the impact on local communities. The Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act 1957 and the Mines Act 1952 provide guidelines for sustainable mining practices and environmental protection. So while there are a lot of policies in place that set precedents for good intentions, the effectiveness of these policies and regulations is often hampered by a lack of effective enforcement and monitoring. This can lead to non-compliance by mining companies and a negative impact on the environment and local communities, which these policies are set to protect. Therefore, there is a need for better enforcement and monitoring to ensure that mining operations are carried out in a sustainable and responsible manner.
Yeah, so we can see that, I mean, there are a lot of acts, a lot of policies, a lot of implementation. But the thing is that the effectiveness of these policies and regulation has been called into and questioned due to the issues such as inadequate enforcement and weak penalties for this violation. Therefore, there are still in future, there are going to be policies that are going to be introduced. And because it's getting more diversified and more people are getting into it, there will be more policies, more laws. But the thing is, we have to monitor it strictly and we have to enforce penalties for this violation, not just weak penalties, but strong penalties. And we need to get rid of this inadequate enforcement. That is which is more important. Yeah. So moving to our next question, how can India balance its need for economic growth with the need to protect natural resources and indigenous communities affected by the mining operations? Yeah, you can go ahead, Zanjana.
Yeah, India is a developing country and has a growing economy, as you stated in the start. And in the world we live in today, it is very important to also give equal importance to the economy. We can't just only focus on the environment, as bad as that sounds. And it is crucial to balance its needs for economic growth with the needs to protect the natural resources and indigenous communities affected by these mining operations. This can be achieved by ensuring that the mining operations are carried out in a sustainable and responsible manner, with strict adherence to environmental and social regulations, the involvement of local communities in decision makings, and is also essential to ensure that their rights are protected. While policies to put this in place are there, again, enforcement needs to be made better. India can also explore alternative forms of economic development that do not rely on mining. For example, the development of renewable energy sources such as wind and solar power can create jobs and stimulate economic growth while also reducing the reliance on fossil fuels and minimizing the impact on the environment. Looking at a circular economy, for example, is another way where you can use the current resources at hand and promote recycling, and that will lessen the environmental impact as well. But mostly it is important to recognize that the impacts of mining are not limited to the immediate area where the mining is taking place. Mining can have far-reaching and long-lasting impacts on the environment and local communities, which is why there is a need for a holistic approach to development that takes into account the long-term and life cycle impacts on the environment and local communities.
I mean, yeah, it is very important actually, like considering the indigenous community. We often forget about these communities, and even these multi-industrial companies and the corporates they're working, they forget about these indigenous communities. We have to promote a sustainable mining practice that can minimize environmental and social impacts. At the same time, we need that decision-making process by enforcing the existing laws and regulation. Additionally, promoting the alternative livelihoods and engaging with local communities can help mitigate the negative impacts, the negative social impacts of mining. Yeah. I think we have less time. We should move to the next question. So our last question, that is, what role can technology play in reducing the environmental impact of mining in India? And what are the barriers to implementing more sustainable practices? Yep.
Yeah, so just to give like a global perspective on how technology has been used to mitigate environmental impact, I would like to start with a company, an Australia-based company called Rio Tinto, which has been established in 2008 and has been using and developing more and more updated versions of new technology to sort of like advance their mining operations as well as making it safer for their employees. So they consider their data to be one of their most valuable assets, and their automated drills, trucks, shovels, conveyors, trains, and ships produce huge amount of data that helps them analyze through the use of clever analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning and automation. And they're able to make their business more safer and more productive. So they have three kinds of technologies that they have used. One is the VR virtual reality at the New Zealand's aluminium smelter, which helps them keep their employees safe by using a simulated 3D version of the smelter. The New Zealand's aluminium smelter team has been recreating safety incidents and then are able to brainstorm strategies to mitigate them. Another technological tool that they have developed is the RTVIS. It's a 3D visualization tool which is built with a 3D gaming engine that helps them see their operations from the inside. So basically it allows them to like fly over a site, dive down and get the detailed information needed, or hover over an excavator, follow a haul truck, or examine an ore body. The software brings together geology, geotechnology, geotechnical drill blast, production, and planning, visualizes surface and subsurface features. So this has delivered many benefits to their operations, including more accurate drilling and blasting, reduced explosive use, and better waste classification, which means that their trucks can optimize the carrying of less waste material and more ore. All this produces their productivity, lowers their costs, and is safer for the environment as well as the employees and people living around those areas.
Yeah, Sanjana, please go ahead.
I think technology can play a significant role in reducing the environmental impact of mining in India, such as remote sensing, satellite imagery, and artificial intelligence, which we just mentioned. And it can minimize the impact on forests, wildlife habitats, and other sensitive ecosystems. But I think it's also important to look at the companies that are doing these projects, because mostly these are multinational corporations that are only looking at profit. For example, Rio Tinto, I know, has decades of history of just labor and human rights abuses and environmental problems, where they have the workers had elevated levels of lead in their blood, and other toxic materials were also found in the nearby waterways. But so I just think that while technology is important, it is also important to have to promote sustainable mining practices, and again, effective policies and regulations, and better enforcement and monitoring, instead of taking just technology and using that to exploit resources more.
Yeah, Varshita, do you want to go ahead? Because I will wrap up with you. Okay. Thank you guys. I think that was a great discussion. Thank you so much